Hello everybody, this is Manu-S and welcome back to another Eternal Reviews video. Today it's time to review the Argenport cards, so let's get started. First off we have Auric Bully. That card's actually really sweet, I think. It's another kind of premium aggressive 2-drop in the game, since it basically virtually is a 4-3 for 2 if you run enough weapons to reliably equip this guy and turn him into a base 4-3, which is really good stats for 2-drop, especially given that it's also a multi-faction card, so it doesn't die to annihilate or suffocate anymore, so it's really good against shadow removal. And yeah, it's just a really powerful guy, and there's a bunch of really good weapons, old and new, in Argenport, like Hammer of Might, Lesrai Falchion, Beastcaller's Amulet, and even some new weapons like Jack's Knife or Bloodletter, so there's plenty of things to choose from. Even Peacekeeper's Broad. So yeah, there's tons of good weapons to build like an aggressive weapon equivalent, like a Rakano style Argenport deck, which I have actually done. And you might get to see a video about that soon. But yeah, great card, and in limited, the 2-power 2/3 is already pretty good, and if it turns into a 4-3, then it's great. So also a premium limited card if you're heavy enough in Argenport to reliably play it on turn 2. Next we have Auric Vigilante. Even though it's a rare and Auric Bully is a common, this is arguably worse than Auric Bully, but still kind of a good card. Like initially I was very skeptical about this card, but by now I kind of like and respect it. Like I don't think it's super good or anything, but it's pretty solid. Like the fact that it grows, like often you play it, then you like kill their blocker next turn, attack, that makes it a 2/1. Then maybe the next turn you can't kill their blocker, but you attack and it still at least becomes a 3/1 and trades with something from them. And then you have like the 3/1 on top in the top 10 cards of your deck that keeps growing again once it gets back and is free. So it's pretty decent, and in limited it's even better. This is more of a like mid-rangey kind of card. Like I think in aggro decks this is a bit too slow and fragile, and there are more better, like more aggressive options to choose from in an aggressive deck. Next we have Bartholo the Seducer. I think this guy is basically everything that we wanted Silverwing Familiar to be. He has Aegis, he has Drew unblockability, and instead of having lifesteal, he has actual stats in being a 2/2 and a pretty irrelevant ultimate, since I don't really know what they were thinking with this ultimate. I mean, like, come on, pay 10, like, on a 3-drop, on an aggressive 3-drop, like, no aggressive deck is realistically, like, no deck that is interested in a card like this is realistically ever gonna be able to pay 10, even if they flood. And especially if they flood that much that they can use that ultimate is not gonna change the outcome of the game usually. So this ultimate is more of a mockery in my opinion. But the card is pretty good without its ultimate already, since the Aegis plus the unblockability makes it an even better vehicle for weapons, and there's great weapons like Lesrai Falchion to make up for the lack of lifesteal that Silverwing Familiar has, and it's overall just a pretty good and annoying resilient threat for a weapon-heavy aggressive Argenport deck. And in limited it's also pretty solid, but not that great I think, since it's basically just a better, like, what's the name of the card? There's this 3-power 2/2 that's much easier to play and doesn't have Aegis, and yeah, like, I don't think the Aegis is that important in limited on a card like this, and you need enough weapons to make this count. It's still a solid card I would say, but not a great card. It's actually better constructed in limited. Next we have Bloodletter. It's a pretty solid weapon actually, like +3/+2 for 3 is decent, a bit below average, or below like what I would like, I guess, if you compare it to Vodakan's staff, but the 1-turn lifesteal is pretty nice. It usually makes for like a at least 5 or 6 attack drain, so like a 10 to 12 attack life swing, which is pretty big in a race, and the +3/+2 usually still is good enough to have a lot of impact, my bigger problem basically with this card is that the competition in the 3-drop slot in these colors is so big, big that so far I couldn't really make use of this because I think Beast Caller's Amulet is almost always better, and then you already have Basolo, and then you probably want Valkyrie Enforcer, and then you already have a lot of 3s, so you can't really play a million 3s, and you also can't play a million weapons, and the 4-cost weapons are also better than this. So this is a bit in an awkward spot, but power level wise it's totally fine, and in limited it's even great. Next we have Slay. I think this card is actually overrated. It's a solid card, don't get me wrong. Like 3 power, kill a unit, is a solid deal. At spell speed, it's not a fast spell, so keep that in mind. That definitely weakens it a bit. The problem I have is that it's Injustice. And Injustice, in most cases, Vanquish is gonna be just a better version of this, because most of the time the things that you really want to and need to kill are the big units, the units that Vanquish can target. Because, first of all, this is bad at killing small units, because killing small units with this, you trading down on tempo. Like if you kill a 1 or 2 drop with this, you're trading down on tempo. If you kill a 3 drop, you're at least breaking even, which is okay-ish, but normally you need your removal to be cheaper than what you're killing for it to be effective enough and not fall too far behind and get overrun if you're on a defensive plan. And the other thing is, a lot of the things that Vanquish can't kill are more like utility stuff where the body doesn't matter, where you either have other ways to deal with them, can ignore them, or simply it's enough to silence them, which is why I think Slay is not as good as it looks. It would be much better in a non-justice color combination. I think in Argenport is like the color combination that needed it the least, because actually any justice deck that also had shadow were like the only decks, especially slower shadow decks, slower justice shadow decks, were the only decks where I never played any Death Strike, because you just don't need to. Between Annihilate, Vanquish and Suffocate, you have enough good, efficient, cheap removal to cover all your bases and be able to deal with all kinds of threats that you need to deal with at an appropriately efficient rate, rather than having to play a clunky 4-cost removal. And yeah, giving that color combination a better Death Strike still doesn't add that much, unfortunately. But yeah, still a good card, just a bit sad to see it in the one color combination that really didn't need it. But yeah, usually I split my removal in a way that I run at least 2 to 3 Vanquish, and then add some Slays if I want more of the effect in my Argenport decks, especially if I don't have that much removal or that much cheap removal, because having some cheap removal is very important. If you play if you have like other cheap removal already, like Suffocate and Torches or stuff like that, it makes a bit more sense to go maybe like 2 Vanquish, 2 Slay, for example. But I don't see how you can justify playing less than like say 2 Vanquish in a justice-based deck, no matter what size or flavor, since Vanquish is just arguably the best hard removal spell in the game, and Torch like the best overall removal spell in the game or whatever. Alright, and in limited it's obviously incredibly good, because 3 power unconditional removal is amazing in limited. Next we have Champion of Vengeance. This card kind of disappoints me a bit and makes me a bit sad, since 4 power 3/3 is really bad, like a 4-drop that dies to Torch at any stage, and also basically trades with most constructed 2-drops in the game, on defense at least. So basically also the turn you play this doesn't block at all. Makes this so fragile, so tempo inefficient, and sets you so far back that the fact that it's invulnerable to damage and grows when you attack. Also, you will usually only be able to either make it a 3/3 that's invulnerable to damage, or a 3/3 that grows and only grows in front by the time you get to attack with it, because having like 4 of each by turn 5 when you're attacking is very unrealistic and unlikely to happen. So yeah, this card is just sad. I think it's just a really terrible champion, and I'm sad about this because I was really hoping that Argenport will get a cool champion, and this champion just is terrible. In limited, it's fine, but not great. Champions that have a requirement of 4 and are not really powerful bombs once they are activated, like Champion of Wisdom, are just not that great. And the other thing is, like I said, the card is so like fragile and slow that the fact that it's resilient on offense when you live the dream and have both turned on doesn't even matter this much, because you're gonna be forced on defense so much by the tempo and like board impact this card costs you that you can't even really race, because you're just gonna lose the race most likely. So yeah, this card is just sad. Next we have Sanguine Sword. Really weird and fairly bad card, I would say. It's basically like a really bad Bloodright Callus. You get a 4 power 2/2 relic weapon that you can turn into a 4/4 relic weapon, since you can only sacrifice 1 unit. And yeah, also I think Argenport is just not that good at sacrificing its own units, so it's not even that beneficial. There's like what, Slumbering Stone, Dark Wisp, and maybe like, I don't know, Auric Vigilante as like early revenge, and I think revenge is too slow and speculative of an ability to make me really actively want to throw the units away, because you're still kind of losing half a card at least, depending on average, like, and depending on how the game goes, you might just basically 2-for-1 yourself because you never draw the revenge card before it matters, and then you basically just like 2-for-1 yourself with Sanguine Sword. So yeah, this card is just pretty underwhelming. In limited it might be okay because a 4/4 weapon on 4 can do some work and get a 2-for-1 itself maybe, so that it makes sure that you basically only upgraded like your weakest unit into something that trades with a better unit from the opponent, plus the sword itself trading with another thing if you can protect the sword well enough. So it might be fine in limited, but fine is the operating word here. Next we have Stone Powder Alchemist, another card that I already reviewed in the spoiler review a while ago. Still think the card's pretty bad. This is basically the old Shadow, what's the name, Acolyte, that used to be like a 3 power 2/1 that drained the opponent for 2. Here we get lifesteal and 1 extra health in addition, and revenge for the cost of 1 power and 1 green influence extra. But yeah, still not impressed. Like, I've seen people try this a bit with like, I don't know, Katra and stuff, and like a Combrenan, like Shadow, Time, Justice kind of life force deck, but even there, like, I don't know, the card is just so underwhelming. Revenge is still very speculative, so I feel like cards have to be close to as good as a card without revenge for them to be good, because the revenge alone is not gonna push them over the top, and not having any board impact, having worse stats than most 2-drops and so on, just makes this really bad. Limited it might be a bit better, but still not very good. I think you desperately need life force triggers or whatever. I can see running this in a limited deck, but yeah, I don't want to play 2/2 lifesteal revenge guys on turn 4, even in limited, and even if they drain the opponent for 2. Next we have Streetwise Informant. Clearly not a constructed card, even though it's a Minotaur, which is nice with the Minotaur Lord, but yeah, we only have 1 Minotaur payoff card so far, and that's only decent. But yeah, in limited this is a really sweet card. 1/4 endurance unblockable means that it pings the opponent for 1 turn basically, while also being a solid blocker, and in the late game, if you have nothing to do with your power, you can gain some health to stabilize or even make a relic weapon better if you have a relic weapon, and then it becomes really valuable. So this is a rock solid Argenport card, and also a really great target for your weapons. Next we have the Reef Stranger. This is decent, like a 5 power 4/4 Stranger is actually pretty good for a Stranger, because you have to always keep in mind that Strangers are naturally bigger than their base stats, because there's so many pump effects. So this is at least usually, I don't know, like a 5/5 or 5 or something that gets some added abilities. So this is stat-wise pretty good. The thing is just like lifesteal is only decent. Like if you have a bunch of good strangers that buff each other, you usually don't care too much about lifesteal, and it's in a bit of an awkward color combination for strangers if you don't want to go like super heavy 5 colors, and it's a 5-drop, and there's already a good 5-drop in the +2/+2 stranger, and you also can run only on so many 5-drops, so this is in a bit of an awkward spot and constructed in terms of strangers, but it's a pretty like strong stranger in itself, and it's a really nice stranger, and even as a regular unit in limited, I think. Especially imagine this with like weapons, like just a pretty solid card in limited, even if you don't have many strangers, and it gets much better if you are in a stranger archetype. Next we have Inquisitor Makoto. Not much else needed to say here, other than I already said in the spoiler review. Card is really good, looks really powerful, 5/5 flying for 5 is already great, and the permanent revenge makes it a really annoying grindy threat that can help medium-sized aggressive decks and mid-range decks really grind and pull ahead, or like slug through some removal and defensive stuff, and it's also potentially a really nice and appealing card for actual control decks, and in limited it's a bomb. Next we have Rolands Choice. One of the weaker choices. I think it's better than Talier's Choice, but still pretty bad. So this is basically a 5 power +3/+3 weapon. It's a bit better than a weapon because it cannot be destroyed and you don't lose it if the unit gets bounced, but it's still just effectively 5 power for +3/+3, which is overcasted, and alternatively it's a plague for 5 power, which is also 2 power, too expensive. Once again, I think this card should have cost 4 power, and then it would have been a very reasonable card. It still wouldn't have been a great card, but it would have been a reasonable card, because +3/+3 for 4 is below the curve, since we have like Hammer of Might and stuff, that is +3/+3 plus added bonus, so it's basically would have cost the same as Hammer, but is weaker, but to make up for the weakness we get the bonus of also having an overcasted plague at 4 power, being 1 power more expensive and requiring a second color for the plague. That would have, I feel like, very reasonably balanced out both effects and the extra cost and the extra color, but no, they had to make it 5 to make it basically an overcasted, bad and unappealing card, unfortunately. I just am sad that some of these choice cards are so bad and so overcasted and basically just 1 power too expensive, because these cards could have been like great balanced staples that give you flexibility and constructed, but instead they are just bad. In limited this is very solid and flexible still, so in limited you're gonna be fine with putting this in your deck. It's a solid card. I don't think it's a great card probably, but it's a fine to good card. Next we have Valkyrie the Announcer. Also not a constructed card, even though it's a Valkyrie for the Valkyrie 4-drop. This is basically Makoto's little brother, which is in limited still pretty fine. So it's basically like the 5 power 3/3 Horo flyer and better, since we get revenged attached to it. Like the 3/3 for flyer for 5 is slightly underpowered, while this is basically good, because the revenge pushes it from decent to good, I would say, and a 3/3 flyer that has the potential to come back is pretty nice. Although revenge on more expensive cards is less impactful, because it takes longer till the revenge happens, and then takes longer for you to draw the revenge unit again, which makes it less likely to happen before the game ends, positive or negative. So the more expensive the revenge drop, the less likely you are to see the revenge part of the card before the game ends. And last but not least we have Grin Vetrov, Judge of Battles, also been reviewed in the spoiler review and used in the event. Card is basically constructed unplayable, 7/9 with like no battle skills, is super underwhelming, and the ability is also pretty situational and underwhelming. And I think the card would be a lot better if it would not do that for other units, but for all your units. So basically if Grinva itself would deal 7 damage when he dies, I think the card would be at least interesting, but given that it can basically just be you play it, the opponent just vanquishes it, slays it, death strikes it. They don't care, they just clear it off without having any impact with cards that cost less than 1/3 of Grinva in the worst case, and it's just, yeah, very underwhelming. And there's also like not a lot of good sacrifice ways and ways to abuse this in any like constructed deck really. And in limited, I mean in limited it's solid, it's still a 7/9 for 7, which is pretty good in limited, but it's a bit hard to cast, which limits its usefulness in limited even, especially since the effect is just decent. So yeah, in limited it's a fine card, but I still think it's probably not a great card in limited. Alright, that's it for the Argenport cards today. Tomorrow we'll continue with the next faction pair, and we are drawing to the end of the review. We only have Skycrack and Xenon to go, and then we are done with the review and can focus on new deck techs again. And as usual, if you want to support the channel and my content, check out the donation link in the description below. If you want to financially support me, otherwise check out the social media, follow me there to stay up to date on all the latest news, and consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel if you found this interesting, entertaining and helpful, and let me know in the comments what you guys think about the Argenport cards. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye.